Hey everyone, and welcome back to Newegg TV. My name is Paul, and today we're bringing you another benchmark video. And this particular video is showcasing the new NVIDIA GeForce GTX 760, particularly the two-way SLI configuration of that particular card. Now, when it comes to benchmarking videos and benchmarks in general, there tends to be a huge variety of variables that might come into play. When you're talking about video cards in general, for example, you might talk about their raw performance, which is usually measured in frames per second. You might talk about other variables such as their power draw or their heat generated. And then of course there's always the element of price. Anyone who's looking at a video card seriously is probably at least considering buying a video card in that line. So this video's, with all that in mind, is intended to give you guys a bit better an idea of what kind of performance to expect from the 760, particularly in an SLI configuration. Now, if you're going to be going with that type of configuration, you're going to be able purchasing two of them, of course, and that would tend to lend itself to about a $500 price point with the cards, at least at present day prices. $500 tends to be a bit more towards the high end when it comes to a gaming computer configuration, but since a lot of folks out there are interested in gaming at higher resolutions, whether you're talking about going beyond 1080 up to say 2560 by 1440 or 2560 by 1600, a two-way SLI configuration with sort of a mid-range graphics card like the 760 is often a really good way to go. Of course, when it comes up to that price point, you have lots of other competition right in that area. You might have some single cards, so we're going to test against some single cards. And then we also have some AMD side 7870 and 7950, which are about the closest competitors to the 760 right now. So before we get into some specs and everything, let's take a quick closer look at each one of these cards. We'll start out here with the featured card for today, and that is of course the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 760. This one here in front is the reference version straight from NVIDIA, so you can't necessarily buy this one specifically. However, you can buy the one that's positioned right behind it. This is essentially the reference design with some slight modifications from PNY, so a big thank you to PNY, of course, for providing this for us to do the two-way testing. I set these both up together. They both performed admirably and without a hitch the entire way. The 760, just to put it in very quick terms, you almost get the performance of GeForce GTX 680 from the 600 series, slightly pared down, but you do get the advantage also of having stuff like GPU Boost 2.0, which is excellent for overclocking, as well as some additional fan controls, as well as the addition of some other features as well. If you're interested, you can check out the 760 overview video where we go into all that in detail. Now, again, when we're talking about card comparisons and we're talking about a close to $500 price point, I wanted to throw a couple single card options up against that. So this is the GTX 780, which actually goes a bit beyond that $500 price point, but it is one of the fastest single graphics cards you can currently purchase. Now, this one features a GK110 GPU, which is the same GPU that is in the GTX Titan. Speaking of GTX Titan, I'm also comparing this to the GTX Titan. Now, this is the one card from this current roundup that I thought was actually a bit out of the range. This is more of a $1,000 card. And this card, you're going to notice when it comes to the comparisons, we're talking about strictly gaming performance. You might notice that the other cards might seem like a bit more of a value. But bear in mind, the Titan has stuff like double floating point precision operations that it's very adept at. So this card is sort of more of a crossover piece, and it can also be used for GPU compute stuff and that sort of thing. But the 780 and the Titan, both very similar cards. The 780, if you're going to be doing pure gaming, I would recommend a bit more than the Titan, but if you want to go all out, the Titan is of course fantastic, and again, those are going to be shown as points of reference. I also wanted to point out for the 760, I'll show you single card and two card configurations. And then when it comes to our AMD cards over here, I'm just going to be showing you two-way configurations. So first off, of course, we have the 7870 GHz edition. We're using a couple of these from Sapphire. These have a 2 gig frame buffer. They've been around for a little while now, and they still perform quite well. These you can get for, actually, if you look at some of the deals on Newegg right now, you can get a really, really good price on this. So if you're looking for a sub $200 graphics card, these are going to be a great option. And of course, two of them in two-way Crossfire, you can get added performance, and that should be shown in the benchmarks coming up very, very soon. So that's the 7870 GHz edition from Sapphire. And then lastly, from a bit more of the higher end from AMD, we have the 7950. This one is the model from HIS. This has the IceQ X2 cooler, so it's a custom designed version of that card from HIS, but it's got the 7950 GPU, and again, two of these together can perform quite well. Again, you should be seeing that in the benchmarks coming up. But bear in mind when you're taking a look at this card, this card's going to slot in from a price point that's a little bit higher than the 760. You do get a 3 gig frame buffer with this card, so if you look at the higher resolution benchmarks, the 2560 by 1600 numbers, you might notice the 7950 doing a bit better in those. That's often due to the increased frame buffer size. Another thing I wanted to point out is I'm not really doing much of a temperature comparison when it comes to this particular roundup of benchmarks. Reason being that these two cards from AMD you'll actually would have seen hitting about 60 Celsius, that's a ballpark figure when it comes to GPU temperatures. However, all of my NVIDIA cards that are over here are all based on GPU Boost 2.0. GPU Boost 2.0 actually has a temperature target, so all of these cards are going to overclock themselves in order to try to hit that target, so you'll almost always be seeing right around an 80 degrees Celsius temperature point, whether you talk about the Titan, the 780, or the 760, and that has nothing to do really with the cooler. That has to do with GPU Boost 2.0, the card overclocking itself and trying to basically give you as much performance as it can based on the thermal threshold that's available. So there's a quick look at all of the cards in this roundup, and again I'm going to be showing you single and two-way numbers for the 760, the single 780, single Titan, and then two-way 7870s and two-way 7950s. Now to give a bit more deeper comparison of these cards when it comes down to the specs, let's go ahead and take a look at a slide giving a side-by-side comparison of all of them. Now you will notice that all of the video cards are from the GTX 700 series, the 760, the 780, and the Titan. These are all based on Kepler architecture, so they're all in the same architecture from the 600 and 700 series. 760 has a GK104 GPU, and the 780 and the Titan use a GK110. You'll also notice a base clock for each one, a boost clock, and then you'll also see peak testing frequency, and that's GPU Boost 2.0 attempting to overclock the card as high as it can go, and that is the frequency that it topped out at in all of my tests. You also notice core count, that's CUDA cores for the GTX 700 series cards. Then you also have stream processors for the Radeon cards. Bear in mind those are not directly comparable, but it is convenient to list them all in the same line. For memory, we're going with 2 gigabytes for the 760 and the 7870, 3 gigabytes for the 780 and the 7950, and then of course the Titan, which has a crazy 6 gigabytes of memory. All of the other specs are listed right there if you want to take a look side by side. And if you are looking at the drivers down there, these are not all the exact same drivers, but they're all close to release day drivers, and some of them have been updated, but the updates were not relevant to the tests that I was running, which is why you might be seeing slightly different drivers. And I was using the 13.6 Beta 2 drivers for the Radeon cards. Next up, let's take a look at the test bed. We are running a Core i7-3970X at 4.5 gigahertz. It's cooled by a Cooler Master Side-N 120XL. Motherboard is the Asus Rampage 4 Formula X79 socket 2011 motherboard. We're running 4x4 gigs of DDR3 G-Skill Trident X memory at 1866, a SanDisk Ultra Plus 256 gig SSD, and a Rosewell Hercules 1600 watt power supply. And then I am going to talk a little bit at least about this first slide, and that is the power draw comparison. I tested the power draw at idle, and you'll notice those numbers are all roughly the same. It was about 158 watts just for the system in a single card, and you'll see a little bit higher power draw at idle for the two-way configurations. And then under load, you'll notice all these cards and configurations actually fell within roughly 100 or 200 watt range of each other. You will notice the Crossfire two-way and the GTX 760 two-way configurations pulling quite a bit more wattage. Of course, that is one of the trade-offs with going with a second card. Now, even though you might not get quite as much performance with, say, a single 780 as you do with two-way 760, you are going to be saving some power, and that is something possibly to consider when you're talking about the long-range use of the card. But that's enough yapping for me. Let's go ahead and take a look at the rest of the benchmarks. And there you have it, all of the benchmark numbers laid out for you. And you might notice I did a few synthetic benchmarks. I also did some real-world benchmarks. I kind of like to give a combination of two so you can get more of a direct comparison as well as a better idea of how these cards might perform in actual games that you might play. One thing I did want to point out, the biggest anomaly from the benchmarks that I ran for this particular set was the 7950s in Crossfire with Metro Last Light. For some reason, benchmarks were not adding up. You might notice that if you take another look at that slide. I don't have a good explanation. I retried and reloaded drivers. I did quite a bit of troubleshooting with that. It just didn't seem to work properly. The 7870s did scale perfectly with Metro Last Light, so I think it was just possibly a bug that I ran into, but anyway, I did want to point that out in case you guys noticed the numbers were a little bit off there. But the 760s in SLI performed very well. And again, you might notice that this is possibly a viable solution for folks who might be looking for a bit more performance, but possibly don't have quite enough to spend on, say, even a single 780. It's a little bit less money than that, but you still get a ton of performance. Also, when you take the AMD numbers into account, one thing I found that the video card manufacturers are very, very good at doing is pricing their cards so that as the price goes up, the performance goes up. And I kind of saw that borne out in the tests. The 760 and the 7950s were kind of trading blows back and forth. 7870 still doing quite well, slotting in just below, and that sort of goes hand in hand with the current price point of that card. And then, yeah, it's a pretty compelling choice whether you want to go with the NVIDIA side or the AMD. Of course, there's pros and cons either way. NVIDIA has come out with the 700 series right now, which has some excellent new technology, and we are still waiting with bated breath for the release of the AMD, whatever the next series of cards might be called. I might know, but I can't tell you guys. But that's going to be all for this video. If you did enjoy it, if you want to see more benchmarking videos just like this one, I'd love to hear your suggestions down in the comment section below. I know with any range of video cards like this, there's always going to be other cards I could have included, or other tests I could have included, or different ways of overclocking or that sort of thing. So I'd love to hear your feedback of what types of benchmarking comparison videos you'd like to see from me in the future, whether it be specific configurations or other platforms or anything like that. So post your comments. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to Newegg TV if you want to see more just like it. Thanks to all of you for watching, and we'll see you next time.